Bridget and Casey, and maybe you would like to just introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm Bridget Kromhout, and I am on the cloud advocacy team at Microsoft, which means they hired me, issued me a Mac, and told me to get people to use Linux on Azure, from which I think we can conclude that we may be living in the darkest timeline, but it's pretty interesting too.
My name is Casey Rosenthal. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a startup called Verica, which develops a continuous verification platform. My background is mostly in reliability and availability in particular for complex systems.
So why Verica? I think we all know the company Microsoft, but Verica, what does it stand for?
So Verica is, the name itself is shortened verification. And it built a continuous verification platform. Okay. So our bet is that CI and CD are pretty well accepted by the industry now. 3 years from now, CB, continuous verification, will be just as accepted by the industry. Nobody will put serious code into production without having a continuous verification stage of the pipeline.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the future or the best practices of building distributed systems in the cloud. Do you have any recommendations for how you build teams that actually is ready to do that in the best possible way? Bridget?
I think that Casey has a lot of insights into this, so I'll just start him off by saying that I think distributed systems do require distributed teams because you absolutely are going to be building world-spanning systems that require availability, and humans are not available 24/7 by 365 by design. So if we're going to have systems that are going to be working and up and not waiting for somebody to wake up and make a decision, then we need to distribute that decision-making in the teams.
Yeah, you said something earlier that really resonates with me about pushing the decision-making to the edge. So it's, geographically distributing teams is great, but you also really need to decentralize the decision-making process because with a distributed system, likely you're going to have a complex system. And in a complex system, you want knowledge workers who know how to improvise at the edge. That's what's going to give your business the properties that ultimately it's going to want to optimize for: feature velocity, availability, fault tolerance, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And that does, I think, feel a little risky to decision makers who suddenly realize they might not be in the loop in every decision. If they are trying to push the decision making to the edge in their organizations, what does that mean? And I think that's something that we need to explore on the human side of tech.
So when decisions are made in the edge of the organizations and in small groups, do you have any recommendations for team sizes that you have been working with that works well, and also the number of teams that can effectively work together in the distributed systems?
To go by the pizza model. So from a span of control point of view, I think for a manager, you're looking at 5 to 7 people, 4 to 7 people, anything over 7 people. And I think as a manager, as a direct manager, you start not being able to give the appropriate amount of attention to your reports. But that model can expand pretty well.
And also, I think if you have people who are working across the org in, virtual teams on, certain projects where they do need the support of their official manager, but they aren't necessarily looped in running decisions by them or anything. You can experiment with different kinds of organization. I guess I would bring that one back a little bit and say it's not even a question of specific sizes, because when you go to the 2 pizza teams question, it's how large are those pizzas? How hungry are those people? Are there vegans in the crowd who are not going to like that pizza but might eat that one? You have there's a lot of discussions.
Hungry vegan. I will eat an entire pizza myself.
Yeah.
So that's a very simple.
Hungry vegan. Yeah. Take you vegetarian.
Yeah.
So those, I feel like all models are wrong. Some models are useful. Is that how the saying goes?
Yeah. Okay. So we agreed that the decisions are best made in the teams. So we need some kind of a compass for the teams to actually make the right kind of decisions. We could call it culture or understanding the company. So what are your views on that?
This is really interesting because, of course, you're founding a startup. So how do you go about making sure that the ideas you have about the organization are going to be the same ideas and ideals that are promulgated throughout the organization? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, so actually I don't. And this is the thing that's really uncomfortable for most of the software industry right now, is that the model that most companies operate under is it's just inherited from Taylorism, where somebody knows best and then they have other people who know a little bit less better, and so you're trying to force your idea down. That works great for making widgets. We're knowledge workers. We're not in a widget making space. So what works better from a culture perspective is flipping that, where management's job is to make sure that the people doing the work have all of the information that they need to do it. And they're not making decisions, they're just keeping them informed. And so it's up to the people on the front lines, the ones actually building the product, to decide what to work on and how to do it. And I know that sounds terrifying to people in traditional organizations.
It actually makes perfect sense when you think about it. Again, back to the a distributed team. You're not going to be able to watch everyone every second and tell them what to do, but you can guide them by setting incentives. So I saw a case once where there was a great deal of excitement and celebration when a team set up a centralized Jenkins server that everyone on the team could use, and end of the month party that team got celebrated. And it turns out the next month, you can imagine what happened. Instead of everyone else moving their workloads onto that Jenkins server, several other teams had set up Jenkins servers. Because you didn't incentivize the behavior you wanted, which was the collaboration and the sharing of resources. You were celebrating you did a thing. And if you will get more if you celebrate.
So I guess we touched a little bit about understanding the business and the mission or listening to the customers. Can you talk a little bit about that? How important that is for tech teams?
Yeah, so so occasionally I have managers come up to me afterwards and say, the model that you're describing of having the engineers make the decisions, that sounds like anarchy. And how can I trust them to not chase the shiniest tech and things like that? My response to that is that I actually have this question that I love that I think captures how well a manager is doing. If you can take a manager's reports, pull them out of work at any point in time and ask them, explain to me why what you're working on right now is the most important thing that you could be working on for the business.
Exactly.
If they have that answer, then as a manager, you're done. You're great. You're doing great. If they don't, then it doesn't matter how many architects there are, project managers, program managers trying to help organize their work. Yeah. They're going to make less good decisions about the actual code that they're writing, the architecture that they're designing, than if they can answer that question.
Teams need to have a purpose. And you in your talk earlier today, you were talking about a young guy you met. Can you maybe just tell that story?
I think that's actually very illustrative of the what is the reasoning behind the thing that you're doing. Because I was in a meeting where a young developer suggested that the next thing he should work on was writing a custom Erlang message bus. And I said, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? And I think that's a question you have to ask. And in this case, he quite honestly said, the problem of me wanting to write a custom Erlang message bus. Yeah. I said, okay. But it's if they don't understand, if anyone doesn't understand what problem they're trying to solve, then they aren't necessarily going to be equipped by their management to do the right thing.
Yeah, they're going to do things like that, which maybe that is the best thing for it, but probably not.
That might not have been the problem that the organization wanted solved.
Right.
And so I would say that when you brought up anarchy, or you said people are worried about anarchy, and I was thinking I've seen it done really well where there is the happy path of the blessed path of, well, if you choose to use these systems and these tools, this is like fully supported. We have a very well built up pipeline that works with this. If you want to try this other thing, well, you might be on your own. You might not have as much help. These other things are way out of scope because we have, contractual obligations, or, we don't want to give data to these companies or whatever. Like, but giving people no, you can't use this. We recommend you use this. You can learn in this space, and maybe we'll get so much value out of it that'll become the thing that is very encouraged.
But right now it's off the paved path.
Right now it's off the paved path, so you might have more work to do. You might be on call for that solution in a smaller scoped team for quite a while if you choose to use something that we don't have a lot of other people with expertise for. Like, how do you handle that kind of discussion of like, but I want to write that in Haskell. And you're like, oh boy, are we going to have very important production things with one person who understands them? Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so those are some of the discussions that should be had, that management should be able to help inform somebody. Look, these are the priorities of the company. What's the best way to get there? Is it to go off and build infrastructure to support Erlang in a Java shop? Or is the best thing to follow the paved path, and will you so that's the conversation that should be had, and then you can be thoughtful about that, and hopefully at the end of the day you get more buy-in from the engineer when they've gone through that thought process than if they're like forced to work in Java and thinking like, well, really it would be, I really want to do an Erlang, but my boss won't let me.
And I've worked in the shop that started life as a Python shop and ended up with a lot more Go tooling, and that's fine as long as I do worry about the single points of failure.
You need to have a critical mass of knowledge in an organization to maintain and actually.
Well, I mean, I don't want any human being to feel like they're the only person who can do X and they can't ever sleep or go on vacation or ride on a plane. Like, I've been that person who was fixing Hadoop very slowly from the in-flight Wi-Fi, and like, it just.
That's a liability for me. That's something else that a manager should be able to explain to the IC. Is like, look, we don't want to end up in a position where somebody is a single point of failure. That's a consideration. If you're the one person who understands JVM in an Erlang shop, that's a problem.
And
by the way, Casey, what happened to your hand?
It's
It doesn't look so healthy. Are you growing an artificial arm? Or
this is in case the systems just snap out of existence.
Okay. That's good.
I'm not sure if it's an implicit threat or if we are very safe because you are Iron Man.
Yeah.
Well, no spoilers. But no, actually, I want this as a reflection of American culture at this point. Is flirts with this notion of, well, we should tear everything down. That's the way to rebuild things, and that's held up in our media and might appear in our politics every once in a while. And as an industry, software is obsessed with this notion of disruption. I think that's a symptom of the fact that most of the software industry is constructed in this bureaucratic, hierarchical manner, and we kind of sense that that's not how the system should work. So we always flirt with this notion of like, oh, we should tear the system down and start over again.
That's actually a really interesting question. Like, if the argument that you're having in an organization is everything will be better on the next greenfield project, you're building a new company from scratch, and I'm guessing that by now you already have a few lines of code. And does anything ever really feel like greenfield after like a few commits? Like,
no, it doesn't.
It's decisions. You layer decisions on decisions on decisions.
Yeah,
nothing is ever like instantiated like that.
Or torn down like that.
Yeah. Or maybe then that leads to we can talk a little bit about done, the definition of done, because at least we now talk about we are getting started with something, but when are we when is something done? When can you jump onto the next feature? When can you safely do that?
I would say like we haven't even talked about when to get started. Like we're beyond the point where you can start anything. There are so many layers of abstraction just to get anything. So many decisions have been made that we have no influence over at this point.
Even in a brand new startup?
Even in a brand new startup.
Can you give us an example of what one of those decisions might be?
Language choice. So our product has to integrate with pieces of infrastructure that already exist.
So environment, you talk about the environment is hard to change because you will deal with the real world.
You're talking about your customers have a thing.
Yeah.
If you would like them to buy your product, you have to
work
with the
that
thing.
Yeah. So there's a whole community that's already developed in Python, for example. There's so much work that has already been done to make tooling nice for certain aspects of things. You know, and it would be foolish for us to choose a language that don't have those niceties, don't have the community there, don't have. And each language has its pros and cons. I'm not holding Python up as the one, but those decisions are already beyond us. So,
because you're building for an ecosystem, and the ecosystem
already
exists.
Yeah, we're just trying to play a part in it.
Yeah, you make a piece that needs to fit in a certain puzzle.
Yeah.
I think that's in the stuff that I talked about when I was talking about tooling for the Kubernetes ecosystem. I got some folks come up to talk to me afterwards about what if you're not going to use Kubernetes? And I'm like, if Kubernetes does not solve actual problems you actually have, you absolutely don't want to introduce a whole bunch more complexity to your systems for no particular reason.
Yeah.
But going back to the done, well, you probably are done with the system when you've decommissioned it. But other than that, you're always iterating on it. You're always iterating on it because as long as you're continuing to get new value out of it, you're always going to add the new helper application or the new way to integrate with the next kind of partner that comes along, or the new way to produce a report or to consume new data that perhaps didn't exist when you first started. But then it comes along and you want to keep iterating.
Yeah, Netflix has this notion that nothing really goes into maintenance mode. So if there's still business value to be had in something, then there's still reason to innovate there.
Yeah, it's also, I think, probably a bad word to use, maintenance, because it does scare up a lot of people. You just say continuous development, and it's like, oh, it's still something exciting to do. It's not just fixing other people's bugs. So,
but there can be very interesting bugs.
There can be.
I would say I think our industry does like to chase the shiny and likes to instantiate and likes to be the pioneer and maybe not the settler and town planner in the Wardley model. But I'm team settlers, all right? Not just because I love settlers at the time, but I'm team settlers because the idea is, hey, you instantiated something, that's awesome. Now do it 1,000 more times at scale for the next 3 years. I'm a lot more interested in that than
it's becoming good at
the spark of something new.
I'm team town planners because that's where the money is.
Team town planners, there's definitely money. But there's also, I think, that idea of if we label something legacy, I like to call it legacy, the place where all the customers and the money are. If you want to call something legacy in this negative idea, how do you feel about turning it off?
Yeah.
And if you feel terrified, then you probably care about it. Maybe you should call it your heritage systems, or maybe you should just call it our business systems.
Contemporary.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good...
well maintained.
Yeah. Well maintained. Yeah. Thank you. That sounds like a really good ending here. So thank you so much for coming. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the conference, and we appreciate so much that you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget.